Sorry about that. There was a forced password change over here. Did you guys have that too?
No, we didn't.
Oh,
Okay,
okay. Sorry about that.
no problem. Is my screen still visible?
Yes.
Okay. So can you tell me where did it disconnected you? What was the last thing that I was talking about?
Um, you had just shown the report that had the average, and you were saying that if you wanted to add median or other things to it, that you could add those.
Okay, fine. So in that report, in this graph, we can include median 95%, 99% line over here by selecting these check boxes. So once I select these check boxes, I can click on display graph and it will include those as well in my aggregate results. It's also possible to change the styling of these. Like I can click on this color, a color palette will come up on my screen and I can just choose one of the colors that I want. Like this and say display graph, you can see the color is changing here. We can also give a title, change the font size, width and height. So all these kinds of things we can do with the help of this particular um, aggregate graph listener. Any questions that you have?
No.
All right. Now let's go with the next listener that we have. And let me reshare my slide. So we also have another listener called as response time graph. In case if we want to understand the time frame and how the responses are being received when these responses are sent from the server, I can use this response time graph for that. On x-axis, it basically plots the time. On y-axis, it's going to be the responses that were received and the time for that particular responses, like 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, like that. Then it basically plots the data points using black color squares, and we can have a trend line connecting these dots. You can see the same thing on my screen over here with the screenshot. You see, similar to the previous one, you have few settings here to control things like the font, the title, and you can also go ahead and specify the values for the x-axis and y-axis, the increment values as well. Now, the thing that is important over here is the interval. So this interval basically controls the data points that are displayed over here. Shorter that interval is, the more data points you will see on screen. So let's go ahead and use this listener in our test. So I'm going to switch over to JMeter and add one more listener, that is response time graph. Now we can change this interval from 1000 to 100. Also, I'm going to rerun my test. So I'll just go ahead and say run. And now if we go to display graph, once the test is completed, it's still green, it's still running. Done. I can click on display graph. Now it's showing me a graph over here. The reason is it's not showing me that new interval because I haven't clicked this apply button. So I'll click on apply and say display results. Now I can see the
Hmm.
response time graph. So over a period of time that is from 8:6:57 to 8:7:06, these were the different response times of the responses for two samplers that we had. Do you have any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay. It's also possible to save both of these graphs in case if you want to save them. There is a save button on both of them. Click on save and then we can say
Mm.
demo blaze test response graph like this. And then we can open it in Explorer. believe it's saved in the bin folder of JMeter. So demo. There it is. So it was saved successfully. We are able to download and view it. Any questions?
No.
Are you able to do this on your side?
Um, I have not done any of the things since I logged back on, but yes, everything before that I was able to find and do just fine.
Do you need few minutes to try it out?
No, it's okay.
All right, fine. All right, so now we want to talk about the next topic that is going to be saving the responses. Now, what happens is all of these responses that are being received from the server, it's a possibility that some of those responses that are returned may have some errors. Like the server, the URL that we are trying to hit, it may be 404, or there might be a 500 error on the server. So we want to store any error results that are there as part of the responses which were received by JMeter. There is a separate listener that allows me to do that. This listener can save the responses which were received to a separate file. We can choose what type of responses we want to save, like the successful responses or the failed responses. So in case if I want only the failed responses, that is usually what we want for the debugging purpose, we should select the response. Next thing is these responses needs to be stored in a folder. So we have to specify a folder path. Now there are two ways of specifying this folder path. One is an absolute path. So what do we mean by an absolute path? So if I say absolute path, it's going to be something like C:ABC folder /XYZ, right? Say maybe Syed, right?
Hmm?
That's an absolute path. When we say relative path, this is going to be the relative to the bin folder of JMeter. Okay. So when we talk about the relative path, it's basically any subfolder inside the bin folder of JMeter. And in order to reference that, you use tilde slash. So you can use tilde slash and then some folder, say my folder, and then we give a prefix for these files. So what this listener is going to do is it's going to assign the numbers to each of these files which are created, and we need to give the file name over here. So the file name I can maybe have, say, result. If there are 10 responses which errored out, then it will have 10 files with the name as result 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Any questions?
No.
All right. So let's go ahead and see how we can use this. So I'm going to switch back to JMeter again. And now we will add the next listener. Say add listener. And here we're going to go ahead and choose save response to file. Now I don't want to save all the responses. I want to save only the responses that are failing. In case if there is any responses that are failing, it will save them. Next, we want to specify where those responses should be saved. So I can give here one of the folders from my C drive or some folder, or I can store it directly in JMeter's bin folder. So if I go to bin folder, I can maybe create one folder here, say responses like this. And inside this folder, I can ask JMeter to save my responses. So we can say tilde slash responses slash say result. Now result is going to be the file name, and it will go ahead and include numbering. If you don't want numbering, you can select this checkbox and say add a timestamp instead of the numbering. So you can control what is used over here for naming these files. So I'm okay with the numbering. So I'll unselect it and keep this as my value. Let's save the test, clear the previous results, and let's run. All of my tests are basically passing. The reason for that is there are no errors. And if I go to that folder, I don't have anything because I have selected here that I want to only save the failed responses. So let's make one of these fail. I'm going to go ahead and change this ID to something, maybe some big number. Let's save the test, clear the previous results, and let's rerun the test. Oh, it's still running. It's not using that as the ID. Maybe we can change the URL itself to something else. Okay, let's change this URL. Let's change this to, I hope this is not present. There it is. Now it's giving errors. And we can also see that it's giving the status code 404. And now if we come back over here, we have the error responses recorded. Any questions?
No.
Okay. So far so good. We're able to record our error responses. But what if I want to save all of this data which JMeter has collected, right? JMeter has collected a lot of data, like it has collected this load time, the latency, the response time, and so on, so that I can maybe use this data in future, right? It is possible to save this data with the help of listeners in a file. So in order to save this data with the help of listeners in a file, I can always go over here. If you pay attention to all of these listeners, I'm going to switch each of them one by one. You tell me what is common between these listeners. Do you see something common between these listeners?
The very top portion is always the same.
Yes. And in the top portion, we have a file name here, right? So we can specify over here a file in which we want to store all of this data. So we can also configure what data we want to store. So I can click on configure here and choose what data I want to save here. By default, all of this data is being saved. But in case if I want, I can include some additional details like the response data. Some of these things are XML only. That means if I select this, then the type of file that I need to save this information is an XML. Whereas the default file is the CSV file. So I want to go ahead and store this information in a CSV file. I can click on browse and specify the location for a CSV file. So I'll just go ahead and say .csv. It's going to create a CSV file with this name since it's not present, and it will be stored in bin folder. I'll say open. It gives an error saying that the file is not present. I'll click OK. It will create that file for me. Now let's go ahead, clear the results, save the test plan, and again, execute the test.
If that file name had been there, would it overwrite what was already there?
Yeah, we will
Okay.
come to that. Fine. Let's first finish this. Okay, the test executed. So now if I go back here, what was the file name? Blaze meter response graph. Okay. CSV. Here it is. So if we open this CSV file, we have all of that data, the timestamp, the time it took, the names, and all those things captured over here. There were 20 requests, so we have 20 rows for each of these requests. Now, what if I run this test one more time, because we already have some data? What happens then? So when I click on it this time, it's gonna ask me, what do you want to do? Because it already has the data. I have an option to append, or I can just simply don't do anything, or I can override the existing file. So I'll just go ahead and say override. So this will just override that existing file. Now, one thing that you should be aware of, if you're running these tests from the command line, it's not going to override by default. It's going to append to the existing file.
Okay.
All right. So now we have seen all of these listeners, how we can save the listener data, the data which JMeter has collected, how we can work with different reports, and how we can generate the graphs as well. Any questions related to anything that I have covered till now?
No.
Okay. All right. Now let's talk about assertions. Now, assertions in JMeter, just like the assertions that we have discussed in Datadog, they basically allows me to mark a given test as passed or failed. So using an assertion, I can go ahead and conclude whether a test has passed or failed based on some values that I will configure. For example, I can say that when the response code or the status code which is received is not equals to a value, then my test should fail. If it is equals to a given value, then it should pass. So I can compare the actual value with an expected value, and then based on that, mark my test as passed or failed. So using assertions, you can identify any issues or deviations from the expected behavior, because we don't want just to run the test. We also want to make sure that the tests are returning the correct value as per our expectations. Now, there are three basic types of response assertions that we have. Excuse me. There are three types of assertions we have. One is response assertion. Using response assertion, you can assert the response, like you can assert the response message which was received from the server, or you can assert things like the status code which was received from the server. There is duration assert. Let's say my customer says that, let's say I have an SLA with the customer saying that all the responses will always arrive within 1 second. Then I can set a duration assertion during my load test to make sure that I get notified when the duration is less than 1 second. Next, we have JSON assertions. Let's say you're testing an API and you want to go ahead and validate the JSON which was sent by the server. You can do that with the help of JSON assertion. Any questions?
No.
All right, so let's go ahead and use the response assertion. We will go back to JMeter, and now these assertions needs to be added to your request. So we'll go to these requests like this one and say add assertions and choose response assertion here. Now we will go ahead and specify the assertion name. I'll say should return 200 status code. It's a good practice to name your assertions based on what they're doing. So I'm naming them, this one saying that I should get back 200 as the status code. Now, this response code applies to the main sample. And what do we want to test? Which field we want to test? I want to test the request, sorry, response code, right? So we just go ahead and select response code. And now, how do we want to compare that response code? I want to compare it using equals. So we select the matching rule here. Next, we need to specify the value. For specifying the value, we have an add button. We'll click on add and we'll specify a value here, say 200. So it's going to go ahead and take the response code and it's going to test if it is equals to 200 or not. If it is not equals to 200, the test fails. Otherwise, it passes. So let's save it, clear the data, and let's go ahead and run these. So once again, I'll say overwrite the file. Now you can see the responses are being passed over here for this HTTP request. This one anyways is erroring out. Right? We can also add more than one assertion. For example, I can add one more assertion here, say maybe a duration assertion, saying that on the main sample, I want these to arrive, say maybe in 300 milliseconds. Should have 300 as response time. So once again, we can save it and we can just clear any of the previous results and then let's run again. Overwrite. Now, if you see here, this time it's failing because if I expand it, it can also tell me which one of these assertions caused this failure, right? So this is the assertion which is causing the failure here. And received time over here is the duration for this response is 393 milliseconds, whereas I was expecting it to be 300 milliseconds. But some of these requests did complete within 300 milliseconds, like this one. This one was completed in 188 milliseconds, and this one was also completed in 212, and this one again passed. Now, if I go back to my summary report, I can also see there is an error percentage which is showing. There is 70% of these requests are erroring. Are you able to follow and understand?
Yes.
All right. So in case if the request is passing, there won't be any information on which assertions has passed. But if the request is failing, then it will indicate which one of these assertions has failed, like this one. And again, this one, and one more here and one more here. All right. Okay. So now we know a bunch of test components, and this is the process that we have followed already for creating our test scripts. One is we start by creating a thread group, we add some samplers, we add listeners, we define assertions, we run the test and analyze the results. So this is the process that you're going to follow for creating the test scripts in JMeter. Here and there, we will add some more elements. Like, for example, if I have a bunch of values in CSV format and I want to use these as the inputs for my test, we can use some other elements. But these are some of the basic elements that are required for writing a proper JMeter test. Do you have any questions for me?
I do not.
Okay. So are we good to go with the next thing?
I think so.
All right. So we already did a load test using the GUI of JMeter. Now let's talk about using CLI. It is not recommended to use the GUI of JMeter for a load test. we should use the CLI of JMeter for doing a load test. For creating the test scripts, we can go ahead and use the GUI. It is designed for that purpose, but it's not designed for running an actual load test. If you want to run a load test, prefer the CLI mode of JMeter. So CLI mode basically reduces the time. It basically uses the less resources on the server on which you are trying to run this test. So if I'm running it locally, if I am using GUI mode, there are multiple threads which JMeter is executing. It's changing a bunch of things in the user interfaces with the help of different threads which are updating the data. I don't want to have my CPU busy with other things apart from running my load test. I can go ahead and use CLI for running the test for that purpose. So CLI can also generate a CSV or XML results, and it can also generate the results in one more format called as JTL. There are three results format which we have: CSV, XML, and JTL. Apart from that, the HTML report that I spoke about earlier, which can be created from user interface, it can also be created from the CLI. So I can go ahead and generate my report from CLI. Now, in order to run JMeter from CLI, we have a bunch of command line switches that we can use. First one is -n. This indicates JMeter to run in a non-GUI mode. Then we have -t, which we use for specifying the test script. What is the test script or the test plan that we want to run? -l is for the location of the CSV file. In case if I want to test result CSV file, I can specify -l. Then in case if you want to generate some HTML reports in the form of dashboard, we can use -e to generate these results. And -o is used for specifying the path to save that HTML report. Here's the syntax of the complete command. You say JMeter -n -t and specify the JMX file path, then -e and -l and the CSV file path, and -o and the HTML output folder. So let's go ahead and see this by executing this command. So first things first, I'm going to go back to JMeter. So here JMeter is running. I'll just go ahead and disable some of the things. Like I don't want this 300 milliseconds. So I'll just disable this thing, save my test script, and close JMeter. Next, from the bin folder, we have to run JMeter using CLI. So I'll just go over here to the address bar and type CMD. This will open command prompt and the current folder. So when you type CMD and hit enter, we have the command prompt loaded with the current folder. Now, I have my JMeter test script here. So the name was demo blaze meter. Where was it? What was the name that I gave? My God, I forgot the name. Okay, it's not here. Believe I've kept it in the downloads folder in that case. Wow. Let me just open JMeter once. Let's look for JMX. Yeah, it's there only, demo Blaze. Let me bring in JMeter and try to open that. Yeah, this is the one. Yes, correct. Okay, so let's close this. Let's open the command prompt again. Now here, we have to go ahead and specify JMeter, then -n for running in non-GUI mode, -t, followed by the test plan path. If it is located in a different location, you can specify the complete location, or if it is present in the same folder, you can just write the name of it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this name and paste it here, .jmx. Next, in case if you want to generate the CSV results, then -l, and then specify the location for the CSV results. I'll go ahead and again specify a location on my system here, say a new folder, say results. So this is the folder where I'm going to save the CSV. So I'll say d:/results/ the name for the CSV. I'll say demo blaze result.csv. Next, we specify -e because I want a dashboard to be generated. And then that dashboard, again, I'll put it in the same folder. Say results/ say report. And we hit enter. Okay, I forgot one more switch, -o, which actually allows me to specify a path. Let's hit enter. And I'm also going to copy paste this command in the chat. If you want to have a look at this command, you can try it out. Done. The tests are executed. And I also have my results. If I go to results folder, there is my CSV with all the 20 tests that are recorded here. And apart from that, I also have a report here. Now this report has an HTML page. If I open this HTML page, it's going to give me a nicely formatted dashboard. Are you able to see that on my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So here on this dashboard, it is generated based on something called as application performance index. It is a standard for performance testing of the applications. So this particular dashboard, which is generated, it contains everything which is essential to be reported as part of performance testing. So here I have two different samples, like this one and this one. Now, for the application performance index, according to this, the web applications should render the responses within 1.5 seconds. So this is basically telling me like whether my application response times falls within the tolerance threshold and the frustration threshold or not. So if you see this one, it's not falling in that particular threshold. Whereas this one is falling, 85% of my requests are falling within this particular threshold. Then we have a graph over here indicating the percentage of requests that has passed and failed. That if we see here, it's also giving me the name of the CSV that was used for generating this report. We do have statistics like we had in the summary report and the aggregate report, all of the statistics. The errors, what were the errors that were found, and the top 5 errors, like these were 404 was the error that was found. And this was in this sampler, they were reported. How many? 10. Next, we also have a bunch of charts here which were generated, like there is over time chart. So responses over the time. Again, they were plotted on this particular chart. For 2 requests, both of these requests are plotted on this chart. Now, we are not able to see this chart with some interesting data because our test ran for just 10 seconds. And this chart is reporting for 1 minute granularity. So if we change this from 1 minute to a lesser amount, we will be able to see the linear data about our responses. Similarly, you also have one for response time percentiles. So we have one for that. Active threads over time, like over the test execution duration, what were the different threads that were active, the number, I'm gonna get that in this graph. Then bytes, how many bytes of data that was transferred over the test duration, we get that. Latency, how the latency was fluctuating during the test, and the connect time for my application and the for my client and the server. Then we also have throughput. So it gives me how many hits per second. Also, it gives me the status codes per second that were received, the transactions per second, and the total number of transactions for all the requests. Whereas this transaction per second is going to give for the 2 different HTTP samplers that we have for each one of them, whereas total is going to give me a sum for both of them. Then response time versus the request time. Again, the how much time is taken for the responses and the requests that will be displayed, as well as the latency versus the request. We also have response times. So we can get the response time percentiles for each of these requests. We can also go ahead and see an overview of the response times, like how many of them are falling less than 500 milliseconds, between 500 and 1500 milliseconds, and more than 1500 milliseconds. Again, that threshold duration. We can change these durations for our applications. We can also see how many threads were created over a period of time. So these are listed here, and the distribution of the responses over a period of time. All of this is reported in this particular report. We can also customize few more things, like this title of the report. It's Apache JMeter dashboard. I can change it to something else. Another advantage is, in case if I want to see all of the data which was captured by my listeners, all I have to do is open JMeter. So if I go back to JMeter, bin folder, and where's JMeter? I just need 2 more minutes to finish this.
Okay.
So what I can do is I can open the test plan that I've created. This was a test plan. And then I can go, let's say I want the summary result, right? I can just go ahead and click on browse and look for that file that was generated, that CSV file which was generated in my results folder. And I can see that results over here. Same thing, if I want aggregate graphs, I can again generate that using that same CSV file. So you just go ahead and select that, and then we can select all of these things like that and say display graph. And now we have our graphs back. So this CSV data is important, and we can reuse this particular data to generate the reports for all of these listeners. Any questions do you have for the topics that we covered for today?
No.
Okay. I want you to do something. Uh, do the testing for Decisions homepage and the About page. You can pick any two web pages of the Decisions website and do a load test using JMeter, and show it to me in our tomorrow's session.
Tomorrow I won't be here.
Yeah, I mean day after tomorrow in that case.
Yes, Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in that case, I'll stop the screen share and the recording.